They told me to ask my daughter for money. My own son had a warehouse full of trucks worth more than my house, and his wife told me to sell my tools instead. That's the kind of sentence that follows you into your sleep. I didn't say a word back to Patricia that night. 63 years old, and I just sat there. But before I tell you the rest, I want you to understand something. This isn't really a story about money. It's a story about who still shows up when you can't offer them a single thing in return. Let me start from the beginning. I live in a small house off Route 9 outside Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Bought it back when steel was still steel, and a man could raise 2 kids on a foreman's wage. The porch steps have been sagging for 3 years now. I keep meaning to fix them. It was a Thursday night in early June, warm enough that the neighbor's window unit was already humming through the wall, and I was sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of mail I'd been avoiding. Past due notice from PPL Electric. A letter from Lehigh Valley Health Network I already knew wasn't good, because good news doesn't come folded 3 times in an envelope that thick. Patricia's phone buzzed on the counter, and I watched her whole face light up like a switch had been thrown behind it. There it is, I thought. The only smile I ever see out of her anymore. And it isn't for me. Danny, sweetheart, she said, practically singing it. Tell me everything. I set my coffee down. Is that Danny? Let me say hello. She didn't even glance my way, turned her whole body like I was a cold draft she needed to shut out and walked into the living room. A fleet expansion? 14 new trucks? Danny, I am so proud of you, she said. You get that head for business from my father. God rest him. He could sell snow to a man in January. I sat there and listened to my wife of 34 years talk to our son like he'd just discovered a cure for something, instead of leasing some diesel trucks. I'm not saying that with any bitterness. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you need to understand what normal looked like in my house before I tell you what came next. She hung up eventually, still smiling, walked back into the kitchen, and the smile dropped off her like a coat coming off a hook. He's doing so well, Walter. That's good, I said. And I meant it. Whatever had gone sideways between me and that boy, I never once wished him bad luck. Patricia didn't say another word. She just slid the electric bill across the table toward me. Didn't ask if I was all right. Didn't ask about the cough I'd been carrying for a month that I kept blaming on the mill dust still living in my lungs after all these years. Take care of this, she said, before they shut it off again. Again, like it was a habit. Like I was the habit. Now, here's the part where I'm supposed to make myself sound better than I am, and I won't. I'll tell you the truth, because the truth is worse than anything I could dress up, and it's the only part that matters. 15 years ago, I wasn't some fool who lost the family savings on a bad bet. I was a machinist, a good one, 31 years on the floor at a fabrication plant outside Allentown. When the plant announced it was closing, I took my pension payout and my severance, and I bought into a small auto parts supply business with a man named Frank Del Vecchio. Everybody said it was smart. Patricia bragged about it to her sisters. Then Frank got sick, real sick, and before I understood what was happening, he'd signed over his half of the debt to me in the fine print of a buyout clause neither of us had read close enough. The business folded 18 months later. Every dollar of my pension, gone with it. Banks wouldn't touch me. My credit score fell through the floor and stayed there. And Patricia never once asked if I was okay. She asked how I was going to fix it. That was 15 years ago. I've been driving for a regional freight company ever since. 6 days most weeks, home smelling like diesel and asphalt. Somewhere in there, my son turned 22 and decided his whole future had been ruined because his father couldn't help cover the down payment on his first truck. He's never let it go. Not once, not even after I explained what happened with Frank. In his mind, I gambled and I lost, and he paid the price for it. Maybe he needed somebody to blame, and I was standing right there. Easiest target in the room. My daughter's different. Carrie's 28, works as a home health aide over in Emmaus, about 25 minutes from here, driving between 3 or 4 elderly patients a day in a car that's older than some of them. She was 13 when the business went under. Old enough to remember what we used to have. Young enough that she watched me rebuild something out of nothing instead of just grieving what was lost. She showed up 2 nights after that phone call with Danny, carrying a Tupperware of stuffed cabbage, the way her grandmother used to make it. She didn't say one word about bills or trucks or fleets. Just set the container down, kissed the top of my head, and said, "You still hacking like that, old man?" "Just allergies, baby." Mm-hmm. She never believed me. Not once. "You're seeing Dr. Okafor on Monday. Don't argue." I didn't argue. There wasn't much point arguing with Carrie. She got that stubbornness from somewhere, and I had a strong suspicion it was me. Dr. Okafor wasn't smiling when he came back into the room. "Walter, I'm not going to sugarcoat this." He set the folder down like it weighed 40 pounds. "There's a mass on your kidney. It's operable, and that's the good news. But it needs to come out soon. Weeks, not months." There it is, I thought. The other shoe finally landing. "Okay," I said, "because what else do you say?" So we scheduled it. That's when a woman from billing came in, kind-faced, uncomfortable, and told me my insurance had a coverage gap on the specific surgical approach Dr. Okafor wanted to use. Out-of-pocket deposit required before the operating room would even be booked. $4,100. "I can look into a payment arrangement," she said, "but the deposit has to be in before scheduling. Hospital policy. $4,100. You want to know something funny? I used to clear that much in 2 weeks, back before Frank got sick. I sat in my truck in that parking lot, 11 Ram, with a check engine light I'd been ignoring for a year, and I ran the numbers 6 different ways, and every single time they came out the same. I didn't have it. My credit was still garbage. No bank in Lehigh County was going to look twice at me. $4,100, and I've got a son with a 14-truck fleet parked outside his house in Macungie. I told myself I wouldn't call him, told myself that for 2 full days. Then I called him anyway, because that's what a father does. You swallow every last drop of your pride, and you call your son, and you hope, God, you hope, he's still in there somewhere underneath it all. He picked up on the 5th ring, and I could hear it right away. Music, somebody laughing, ice clinking against glass. "Dad? Kind of a bad time. We're closing on the Harrisburg contract tonight. Danny, I need to talk to you about something serious." A pause, muffled, like he'd covered the phone. Then, "All right. Go ahead." I told him everything. The mass, the surgery, the coverage gap, the $4,100 I needed by the end of the week, or they wouldn't put me on the schedule. There was a long silence. Long enough that for one foolish second I thought, maybe, Dad. His voice went flat, cold. "I spent 10 years digging myself out of the hole you and Frank Del Vecchio put this family in. You know what it took to get where I am? And now you want me to pull money out of the business for this. Danny, this isn't about the business. This is surgery. You did this to yourself, Dad. You always do. Ask the hospital for a payment plan. That's what they're for." A pause, and then quieter, colder. "I've got a reputation with these lenders now. I can't have this family looking unstable." The line went dead, just like that. My son hung up on me while I sat in a hospital parking lot with a tumor in my kidney so he could get back to his contract signing. I called Patricia next, asked if she'd talk to him, maybe soften him up. "Don't you dare mess this up for him," she snapped. "He worked hard to get out from under your mess. Carla's got steady work, doesn't she? Ask her." Carla. She meant Carrie. 34 years, and she still got our daughter's name wrong when she was too busy being angry to think straight. I hung up and sat in that parking lot a long time. Didn't cry. I was past crying by then. Just sat there thinking about how a man could work his whole life trying to hold a family together and end up alone in a pickup truck outside a hospital, doing math that refused to add up. I met Carrie at a diner off Route 78 2 days later, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who calls everybody hun. I hadn't planned on telling her. I really hadn't. Was going to smile, eat my meatloaf, let her believe everything was fine. She knew before I said a word. She always knew. "Dad," she set her fork down. "What's wrong? Tell me right now." So I told her, and I want you to understand. I was ashamed to be sitting across from my 28-year-old daughter, a home health aide who barely clears the rent some months, about to need money her own brother had turned down, without so much as a breath of hesitation. I hadn't even finished the sentence. Carrie reached into her bag and set an envelope on the table. then turned her phone around so I could see the screen. A payday advance app. Approved. $800. Dad, stop talking. Her eyes were wet, but her voice didn't shake at all. There's 2,600 cash in there. I sold the ring Grandma left me this morning, the one with the little sapphire. Carrie, your grandmother's ring. My throat closed right up. Rings can be replaced, Dad. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand hard, the way you hold on to something you refuse to let go of. You can't be. I'll pick up extra shifts. It's fine. I sat in that booth and wept in front of a waitress named Donna and half the lunch crowd at a diner off Route 78, and my daughter, the one who didn't have a fleet of trucks, the one nobody bragged about on the phone, held my hand across a Formica table and told me I was going to be all right. She's the only one who's ever really seen me, I thought. The only one who ever did. I had no idea, sitting in that booth, just how much that moment was about to matter. I had no idea what was still sitting out there in a filing cabinet 15 years old waiting on me. But that comes later. Let me take you back to the morning of the surgery first, because you need to understand what it cost to get to what came after. They wheeled me into pre-op at 5:30 on a Tuesday, and the last thing I remember before the anesthesia pulled me under was Carrie's face close to mine, her hand squeezing my fingers. You're going to be fine, old man. I already told the nurses you're too stubborn to die on a Tuesday. Where did she learn to be this brave, I thought. 28 years old and steadier than I've been in a decade. Then the lights went out. I woke up 9 hours later with a tube down my throat and a pain in my side like somebody had backed a truck over it. Dr. Okafor came by that evening, still in his scrubs, leaned down close so I could hear him over the monitor beeping. We got clean margins, Walter. You did good. I didn't cry. Didn't have the energy left in me. I just lay there thinking about Carrie's grandmother's ring, sitting in some pawn shop case with a stranger's fingerprints on it by now. She bought me this, I thought. Not the hospital, not the insurance company. My daughter bought me this with a payday loan and a piece of jewelry that was the only thing she had left of her grandmother. I'm going to make this right, I told myself. However long it takes, I don't care if I'm 70, 80 years old. I'm going to make this right. I spent the next 2 weeks recovering on Carrie's fold-out couch, because my own house sat empty most days and Patricia hadn't so much as texted to ask how the surgery went. I wasn't about to lie up alone in a quiet house, listening to myself breathe. Carrie's apartment was small, 1 bedroom above a laundromat on Chestnut Street, the kind of place where you can hear the dryers rumbling through the floor at midnight. She'd taped her patient schedule to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a little house. Right beside a photo of the two of us from a county fair years back, I looked at that schedule every single morning. Every one. She's out there right now, I thought, driving 40 minutes between 3 patients in a Corolla with 200,000 miles on it, because she sold her grandmother's ring for me. And Danny's leasing a new F-350 to haul equipment he doesn't even drive himself anymore. That thought sat heavier in my chest than the surgical scar. She'd come home every evening still in her scrubs, smelling like hand sanitizer and somebody else's kitchen, and she'd check my incision, heat something simple for us both, sit with me through whatever was on the television. And never once, not one single time, did she bring up the ring or ask when I'd pay her back. That's the difference, I thought, watching her fall asleep sitting up in a kitchen chair one night, still in her work clothes. Danny gives because he wants somebody to notice. Carrie gives because it never once crosses her mind as giving. To her, it's just love, plain and simple. It was a Monday, 19 days after the surgery, when the mail carrier knocked instead of just leaving it in the box. Carrie was out on her rounds. I answered the door in my robe, still moving slow, still tender through the ribs. Got 2 certified letters here, need a signature. One from an outfit I didn't recognize right off. Keystone Ridge Holdings, and one with a return address I knew by heart, because I'd been getting mail from them for 15 straight years, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Here we go, I thought. Another update. Another 6 months of nothing. Another form letter telling me the remediation's still ongoing. Don't touch the property, don't build, don't breathe near it. See, what I never told you is that back before Frank Del Vecchio ever came into the picture, years before that even, I'd bought 40 acres out past Lower Nazareth Township with my pension rollover, cheap land, half swamp, figuring I'd sit on it and let the value climb. Then a fuel depot 2 properties over had a containment failure, and the runoff crept onto my land before anybody caught it. Frozen under a state cleanup order the same year my business partnership fell apart. Couldn't sell it, couldn't build on it, couldn't do a blessed thing but pay the taxes and watch it rot right alongside everything else in my life. I almost set that envelope on the counter unopened and went back to the couch. Something made me sit down at Carrie's little kitchen table instead and tear it open right there. Read it twice. Then a third time slower, because I didn't trust my own eyes. Remediation status. Complete. Site released from state oversight effective May 30th. Complete. 15 years. 15 years of taxes on land I couldn't touch. 15 years of my credit sitting in the gutter. 15 years of my own wife looking at me like a stain on the family name. And there it sat in plain black and white. Done. Released. Clean. I set that letter down like it might go off if I moved too fast. Then I opened the second one, Keystone Ridge Holdings. Turned out, while my land sat locked up under state order, a new logistics corridor off Route 33 had finally broken ground, cutting right along my property line. 40 acres of what used to be worthless wetland with a fuel stain under it were now sitting a quarter-mile from a brand new interchange, zoned for commercial development, surrounded by exactly the kind of growth I'd bet on a decade and a half too early. The letter was an offer. A real one, with numbers behind it. $11 million. Cash. 45-day close. I read that number probably 20 times. I want to tell you I hollered and ran laps around that little apartment. I didn't. I sat very, very still. 11 million, I thought. And 3 weeks ago I was crying in a diner because I couldn't scrape together 4,100. I looked up and my eyes landed right on that patient schedule taped to the fridge. Little house magnet. Carrie's handwriting scrawled in the margin. Mrs. Petrosky, 7 a.m. Don't forget her insulin reminder. Because she'd rearranged her whole week to keep working while nursing her father back to health at the same time. I didn't call Patricia. I didn't call Danny. I want you to hold on to that, because it matters for everything that comes after. I never hid this money from anybody. I just didn't see one good reason to tell people who'd already told me, in their own words, that my problems weren't theirs to carry. I called a man named Ed Marchetti instead, an accountant who'd handled my books back when the auto parts business was still breathing, and stuck around after everything collapsed because I always paid him what little I could, on time, every time. I told him everything: the release, the Keystone offer, the number. Long pause, on the line. 11 million, he finally said. Walter, that changes things. I know it does. I looked at that fridge schedule one more time. That's exactly why I need you to pull something else first. You remember the paperwork Patricia had drawn up about 6 years back? Ed went quiet. The asset separation agreement. The one Danny pushed for. That's the one. I want you to pull it and tell me word for word what it says. Because if I remembered that document right, Patricia hadn't just protected herself from my failures. She'd signed away every claim to whatever came after, good or bad. Ed called back 2 hours later, papers shuffling on his end. Walter, I'm going to read you the exact language. Patricia Kowalski hereby waives, releases, and forever discharges any and all present or future marital claim, interest, or right, legal or equitable, in and to the real property located in Northampton County described herein, including any proceeds, appreciation, or value realized therefrom, regardless of cause. Regardless of cause. Ed, I said, slow, does that mean what I think it means? It means exactly what it says, Walter. 6 years ago, she wanted the house and her retirement account protected in case that swampland ever got seized over your debts, so you two partitioned the marital estate. She took the house as separate property, and in exchange you took full, sole ownership of that land, debts and all, notarized, binding the day it was signed. Whatever happens to it now, good, bad, or 11 million, she's got no legal claim to a dime of it. Danny pushed her into that, didn't he? Set the whole meeting up himself from what I remember. Told her it was smart, told her it would protect her credit if the land ever got seized. I almost laughed, except nothing about it felt funny. Well, Ed said, Turns out he was smart, just not in the direction he was aiming. I sat at Carrie's kitchen table with the afternoon light coming through those thin apartment blinds, and for the first time in 15 years I felt something in my chest that wasn't shame, wasn't grief, clarity. Ed, I want to move on the Keystone offer. Quiet. Nobody outside this call knows a word about it until it's done. Not even Patricia? Especially not Patricia. Not Danny either. I looked at that little house magnet one more time. I want the sale closed, and I want an irrevocable trust set up right alongside it. In Carrie's name, all of it. Ed didn't say anything for a second. The whole 11 million, Walter? Every dollar left after my debts are cleared. She sold her grandmother's ring for me, Ed. Took out a payday loan at some criminal interest rate so I could get on an operating table. She's been rearranging her whole work schedule for 3 weeks so I'd have somewhere to heal. Meanwhile, my son told me to ask the hospital for a payment plan, and my wife told me not to ruin his contract signing. So no, I'm not splitting this 3 ways out of some sense of fairness. Fairness already happened. It happened in a diner off Route 78, and only one of my children showed up for it. I hear you, Walter. I'll have the paperwork ready by Friday. One more thing. Don't put my name on the deed for the house I'm buying her, either. Trust owns it outright. I don't want one single piece of this that anybody can argue over later. I want it airtight. Airtight, Ed said. Understood completely. I hung up and sat there a long while, listening to the dryers rumbling below through the floorboards, looking at that little schedule stuck to the fridge. They're going to find out eventually, I thought. And when they do, they're not going to walk through that door asking how I'm healing. They're going to walk in asking about money. That's just who they've become. Maybe who they always were. I wasn't wrong. But not the way I expected, and not for the reason I expected. See, I figured Danny and Patricia would show up because word got around about the land. They didn't know a single thing about it yet when they showed up at Carrie's door 11 days later. They came because Danny was drowning in a mess entirely of his own making, and he needed money so badly he was willing to walk right into the one place he'd sworn he'd never set foot in his broke, embarrassing father's temporary bedroom on his sister's fold-out couch. He had no idea what was waiting for him. 11 days. That's how long I had between hanging up with Ed and hearing that first hard knock on Carrie's door. 11 days to get the paperwork signed, and to sit with the strangest feeling I'd had in over a decade. Patience. It didn't hurt the way I expected. I walked a little farther every morning, sat out on Carrie's little balcony in the evenings watching the sun drop behind the laundromat sign, thinking about 40 acres of land that had finally, after 15 years, stopped punishing me. Then that Thursday evening came, and somebody pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Dad? Dad? Open up. I know you're in there. Danny's voice, loud, ragged at the edges in a way I'd never once heard from him. Not the smug, satisfied Danny from the steakhouse phone call. Something else was underneath it now. Carrie got to the door before I did, still in her scrubs, and pulled it open with a look on her face. I recognized the look she probably gave patients' families who overstepped. You want to explain why you're beating on my door like the sheriff? Danny pushed past her without answering. Patricia right behind him. Picture it, my son. 32 years old, dress shirt wrinkled, tie hanging loose, sweat on his collar even though the AC was running full blast. My wife behind him, arms crossed, jaw set hard. Neither one of them looked at me and asked how I was healing. Not one word about the surgery, not one word about the scar still tender under my shirt. Dad, Danny's voice cracked, just barely, right in the middle. We need to talk. There it is, I thought. Not, how are you feeling? Not, I'm sorry I hung up on you in that parking lot. Straight to business. Same as it's always been. Sit down, Danny, I said. You look like you're about to have a heart attack of your own. He didn't sit. He paced. I was going through the county commercial filings today, he said, voice shaking. Keystone Ridge Holdings logged a title transfer. 40 acres out past Lower Nazareth. Your land, Dad. 11 million cash. You sold it, didn't you? Patricia's mouth fell open. 11 million, Walter. Is that true? So that's how they found out, I thought. Not from me, from a county filing. Almost funny, in a sick sort of way. It's true, I said, calm as I could manage. Closed 12 days ago. 12 days? Danny's voice climbed. You've had this for 12 days and you didn't call me? Your own son? I looked at him a long moment before I answered. Last time I called you, Danny, you were closing a contract while I sat in a hospital parking lot trying to figure out how I'd pay for surgery. You told me it wasn't your problem. So no, I didn't feel any rush to call the second something good finally happened. That should have been the moment he softened. It wasn't. You hid this from us, Danny said, finger jabbing toward me like it would make the accusation truer. You knew the cleanup was wrapping up. You knew that land was about to be worth something. You let us think you were struggling this whole time. Mom's still driving a 9-year-old Malibu, Dad, while you sat on a fortune just so you could hand it all over to your favorite kid the second it paid off. He actually believes that, I thought, rewriting the whole thing in real time, right in front of me, and believing every word out of his own mouth. Danny. My voice came out quieter than his, which somehow made the whole room go quieter too. I didn't know that land was worth a dime until 19 days ago. Found out sitting right there, on your sister's fold-out couch, recovering from surgery she paid for. You want to talk about hiding things? I didn't hide a fortune from this family. I hid the fact that I was scared out of my mind for 15 straight years, because every time I tried to talk about it, your mother told me to fix the bill, and you told me I ruined your 20s. Patricia stepped in then, arms still crossed, chin lifted. Don't you dare stand there and play the victim, Walter. I stood by you for 34 years while you dragged this family through your bad decisions. That money belongs to this family. You're being vindictive. You're being cruel. You're being stingy. You're being stingy, Dad, Danny finished for her, and it's disgusting. Stingy. I almost laughed out loud at that one. A man who wouldn't spare his father $4,100 for kidney surgery, calling that same father stingy over $11 million. We're not asking anymore, Danny said. And here's where his voice really shifted. Dropped low, mean, the voice of a man who thought he was about to win. Mom's filing for divorce in the morning. Financial abandonment, the works. My attorney's already drafting a motion to freeze every account tied to that sale until a court sorts out an equal split. You hid marital assets, Dad. That's not gray area. That's fraud. He slammed his open hand flat on Carrie's kitchen table, the same table where weeks before she'd slid an envelope of cash across without a second thought. You'll be tied up in litigation so long you won't have a cent left when we're through. I glanced at Carrie's face. That's my daughter's kitchen table, I thought, and he just put his fist on it like he owns the place. I looked at Danny a long moment, then at Patricia, then stood up slow, careful, still tender through the ribs, and reached into my jacket pocket. You want to talk about lawyers, Danny? Let's talk about lawyers. I pulled out 2 folded documents and slid the first one across to Patricia. You remember this? She looked down, and I watched the color drain right out of her face before she'd even finished the opening line. 6 years ago, I said, you and Danny sat me down at my own kitchen table. You were scared, genuinely scared, that the bank would come after your accounts because of my land debt. Danny's idea, by the way, his brilliant idea, told you it was smart, told you it'd protect your credit if that debt ever caught up with the property. So you signed this. I tapped the paper. Your lawyer drew up a partition agreement. You took the house and your retirement as separate property, and you legally handed me full, sole ownership of that land, and every liability attached to it. Read it again, I said, as gentle as I could manage, because there wasn't a shred of satisfaction in watching her hands start to shake. It doesn't say debt, it says regardless of cause. You didn't just protect yourself from my failure, Patricia. Under state law, you converted that land into my separate property, and you signed away every future claim to it, good or bad, just to keep your hands clean of my mess. Your own lawyer explained every line of it, and Danny signed as a witness. Danny's face had gone pale too, but he wasn't done, never was that boy. That doesn't matter, he snapped. I'll still take you to court. On what grounds, Danny? I slid the second document across to him. Take a look. Before you finish that sentence. He looked down. A bank statement. Carrie's bank statement. $1,200, I said. That's what's sitting in your sister's checking account right now. Because 3 weeks ago, she sold her grandmother's ring, and took out a payday loan at 22% interest so I could get on an operating table. While you were closing a contract and ordering top-shelf whiskey, your sister was rearranging her whole work week so she'd have somewhere to leave me while I healed, driving a Corolla with 200,000 miles on it to a job that pays her $38,000 a year looking after people's grandparents. I let that sit in the room a second. You want to talk about court, son? Go ahead. Bring every lawyer in Northampton County. But before you do, you explain to a judge how you plan to claim a share of assets your mother legally waived in writing 6 years ago on your own advice. Explain to that judge where you were the night your father needed $4,100 for cancer surgery and where your sister was. Nobody said a word for a long moment. Just the window AC humming, and somewhere below, a dryer buzzer going off through the floor. I didn't hide this money from you, I said, and my voice finally came down soft, tired, done. I found out about the land's release sitting right here on that fold-out couch, 19 days after surgery. Took another 12 to close the sale, and the trust was finalized last week. I didn't keep it quiet to be cruel, Danny. I kept it quiet because I needed time to make sure it went to the only person who actually earned it. But I want you both to understand something. Even if I'd known sooner, even if I'd had months of warning, it wouldn't change one single thing sitting on this table right now. I looked at Patricia first, then Danny. You two walked away from this family a long time ago. You just hadn't gotten around to the paperwork. The trust is finalized, I said. Irrevocable. The full 11 million goes to Carrie. All of it. First thing Ed did was wire a payoff to that predatory lender and burn her payday contract to ash. Then he paid off the lease on this apartment outright, so she won't owe a dime while her new house is being finished. He set up a fund for the tutoring and transportation program she's wanted to start for her elderly patients who can't afford it. There's a car waiting for her, nicer than the Corolla, though she's going to fight me about it. I folded my hands on the table. You're both officially free of my mistakes now. Isn't that what you wanted? For 15 years I heard about how I ruined this family with my failures. Well, congratulations. The failure's over. And it turns out the two of you signed yourselves right out of everything that came after it. Patricia's mouth opened. Nothing came out. First time in longer than I could remember, my wife didn't have a single word left in her. Danny just stood there, jaw working, staring at that bank statement like it might rearrange itself into different numbers if he looked hard enough. Get out of my daughter's home, I said, quiet, final. Both of you. They left in a silence I'd never once heard out of either of them in 34 years of marriage and 32 years of raising that boy. No slammed door, no last word. Just two people walking out of an apartment, realizing in real time that the very cleverness Danny had always been so proud of, the legal maneuver he'd talked his own mother into, was the exact thing that had locked them both out of a fortune neither one of them would ever touch. Carrie stood in the kitchen doorway after they'd gone, arms wrapped around herself, watching me. Dad. Her voice was barely a whisper. You didn't have to give me all of it. Yeah, I said. I did. I walked over and put my arm around her, careful of my ribs, and we stood there a minute, in that little apartment above the laundromat that wouldn't be hers much longer, not because she was losing it, but because she was finally getting more than she'd ever asked anyone for. Rings can be replaced, I remembered her telling me weeks before, sliding an envelope across a diner table. You can't. She'd been right about that. Turned out I couldn't be replaced either. Not to her. And in the end, that was worth more than any number Keystone Ridge Holdings ever put on a piece of paper. We stood there in the quiet, my daughter and me, finally safe, finally free. And somewhere across town, my son sat down that night to figure out how he was going to explain to his lenders that the 14-truck fleet he'd bragged about wasn't nearly enough to save him now, and there wasn't a single soul left in his corner willing to bail him out. Funny how that works out.